happy Monday, and welcome. This is Power Talk, and I'm your host, Jean Adrienne, and I hope everybody had a stunning experience with the full moon, and I know that it was some pretty powerful energy, kept me awake. I've got a great show on tap for you tonight. Tonight we're going to be talking about alcohol and opioids. My guest is Scott Stevens. His website is www.alcohologist.com, alcohologist.com. Scott is an award-winning author. He's got several books. They've really got catchy titles. And his most recent book is called Look What Dragged the Cat In. And it's about the quote-unquote opioid crisis. So Scott's a journalist, but he used to be a mutual fund industry executive. And then he turned his own personal story into some really helpful books for anybody. I highly recommend his work. And welcome, Scott.
Thanks, Jean. Pleasure. Enjoyed the program and look forward to our talk today.
Yeah, me too. It's really timely that you've written this book because, I don't know, most people probably don't realize that, they think everybody's dying because of the media stuff on dying from opioid stuff. And, research shows that more people die every year from alcohol than from opioids, which is kind of cray-cray, that we're putting all of this emphasis on opioids. Mm-hmm. So before we dive into this, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this field.
Well, I am a person in long-term recovery myself. Mm-hmm. And as I was beginning my recovery journey, I started studying more about the disease of alcoholism and also the drug alcohol. And as I was learning more, about the health consequences of even moderate drinking, as I was learning more about the disease, as I was discovering more about the drug pattern of the drug culture in the United States, even the illicit drug like the one we're talking about, mm-hmm. I kind of sat back for a second and said, I'm a reasonably well-educated guy, and if I didn't know this stuff, there's a lot of people who didn't know this stuff. So as I began my first book in 2010, What the Early Worm Gets, and I started putting in some of these tidbits, and there was appetite for more of that. So here I am 5 books later, and each of them talks about a different aspect of addiction, of alcohol, of alcoholism, and the disease that about 12% of the population has with the disease of addiction, and the number one drug of choice in this country is the drug alcohol.
Yes. And, addiction covers such a wide swath because some of the things can create, life-changing and life-losing, but some of them, like an addiction to food, well, that actually can directly affect health, but addiction to filling the hole in with shopping, for example. The home shopping network can be an addiction. And I think it comes into play anytime someone is looking outside themselves for something that they think they don't have. And mm-hmm. they try to fill in the hole with, you name it. Is it going to be addiction of choice?
Right. Those process addictions like shopping or gambling or sex addiction, there's a whole raft of them out there. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the world of addiction or the disease of addiction, you're exactly right, Jean, that this is about filling a hole. And when I took alcohol out of my life, for example, that left a hole. That was part of my identity. And mm-hmm. now I had to reestablish my values. Actually, I went back to the value system I had growing up, which may have led to or been a contributor to my alcohol problem, is that I started living away from that value system. So I went back to that. And in the place of the alcohol, which held a very big part of my life, I was drinking nearly 2 liters of Jack Daniels a day.
Whoa.
Which is a pretty ridiculous amount. I definitely don't encourage that for long-term living. And as I look at that, man, that's a large part of my life. What am I going to do now? And filling it with the children, filling it with the role that I have in the recovery community, filling it with my books. And, there are other things to put in that hole rather than to choose another addiction, another drug of choice, whether it's a process addiction, if gambling was my drug, or another form that would be more detrimental to my health, just a different avenue. It didn't make sense. So in my recovery, filling that hole is very important.
Yeah, exactly. So why do you think that the media is so why do you think the media is so focused on the opioids rather than really getting in and just working on addiction as a whole?
Well, there are several reasons, and I launched this book in Paris last year, and through conferences in Paris and London and Amsterdam, I was able to explain part of the American phenomenon of media. And what the media says is news is what is news. Unfortunately, that's the mainstream media is unfortunately not a service. It is a disservice a lot of times. What they're focusing on is, okay, we have something that if we call it an epidemic, we're going to get people's attention. And granted, let me just backtrack here. Every one of these deaths by opioids or any other kind of drug, they're all tragedies. And
absolutely,
there's no downplaying that at all.
Right.
They're certainly not sensationalizing it either. And that's what the news industry has done to attract viewers. Also, in the news industry, the news business, the television business in general, is supported by advertising dollars. One of the largest advertisers in the United States is the alcohol industry. Mm-hmm. So that is especially true in the sports division, where we just had a couple of NFL division championship games yesterday. How many beer ads do you think were on that? About 2/3 of them.
Right. Yeah.
So the news industry isn't going to slap the hand that feeds it. Mm-mm. And finally, we also have an issue that every politician can get behind because they're not sacrificing campaign dollars. One of the biggest sources of influence money in the United States is the beverage alcohol industry. They are a major lobby, a major force in Washington, D.C. So a politician isn't going to go out and say, we have an alcohol pandemic when we do, when 90,000 Americans are dying from this drug every year. Instead, we'll go after opiates, because the tragedies are mostly young, and we're not annoying a major campaign contributor.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and alcohol is so easy to get that it makes it easy to have that be a drug of choice. Mm-hmm. It's much more difficult to get opioids. You have to have a prescription. You've got to go to a doctor and that's going to involve some form of when it becomes an addiction, some form of subterfuge to make sure you have enough to keep filling up that empty hole, because the opioids just want you to take. They need more and more and more in order to be effective, or to give the person that placating feeling or that sweet spot that they're looking for. Now, I don't know, I'm not sure where you live, but I live in Florida, where we have now, for all intents and purposes, legalized marijuana for medical purposes.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other can of worms, but it can be helpful. I've got friends who are dealing with cancer right now, and what's really keeping them alive and giving them palliative care as they deal with the disease that's wreaking havoc on their body is medical marijuana. Mm-hmm. So it's like, where do you draw the line?
Well, on the medical marijuana front, that's a Trojan horse that's very, very often used to ease the way into recreational marijuana. Mm-hmm. Is there a legitimate use for medical marijuana? Yes, there always has been. We have synthetic marijuana in Marinol and several other forms that people can take that has been through the FDA. The FDA has recently approved a form of marijuana for the treatment of a seizure disorder. Mm-hmm. So the more we discover with plant-based remedies, the better. We need to research the daylights out of this.
Sure.
But as a recreational drug, not exactly our best plan. If I look at recreational use and legalizing it for recreational use, I've got 2 kids in school. Which of my teachers do I want stoned out of their minds?
Right.
Which bus driver going down the street do I want to have the same problem with? Yeah, there are that can be the extreme, certainly, but we look to Colorado as an example. Many people point to Colorado as an example of recreational marijuana success, in that it's bringing extra money into the coffers. However, it is also causing more damage than it's paying for. So the cost side of things isn't keeping up with the revenue side of things in terms of extra healthcare costs, in terms of added public safety measures, such as an increased number of marijuana impaired drivers. So the argument that marijuana is a harmless drug and why not legalize it and treat it in the same manner as alcohol is, well, we have 90,000 deaths a year to alcohol. Do we need to recreate that problem?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really hard to know where it passes a point of being helpful and moves into a place of not so much.
Really, the only people who want marijuana legalized for recreational use are people who stand to benefit financially from its legalization, or people who want to smoke a joint and not get in trouble for it.
Yeah.
The medical marijuana community has a very active voice, and it does have a legitimate place in pain management under the right circumstances and under the right supervision.
So, what was your biggest inspiration for writing this particular book? Because you've written, 4 others?
Yeah, 4 others. When I wrote "Look What Dragged the Cat In: The Rise of an Opioid Crisis," I kept hearing on television, just like everyone else, that we're in the middle of an epidemic. And I said, whoa. Wasn't the 1918 Spanish flu an epidemic, and that killed 110 million people worldwide in a single year? And we're calling this range of deaths, and again, they're all tragic, but far lower in number. We're calling that an epidemic. Well, that's when I began to look at my experience as a newscaster. I started my career there, and I said, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. The newsrooms are doing what they do. They sensationalize things. Every one of those is a tragedy, but we're not quite at an epidemic here. We are at a crisis. But how did we get here? We're spending a lot of our energy, or a lot of our time, a lot of our congressional activity in coming up with ways to clean up what the cat dragged in ways of changing the prescription protocol to make sure that the drugs are going to the right people and in the right amounts, and we're limiting the quantity. We're rounding up drug dealers in addition to unscrupulous doctors. We're going after the pharmaceutical companies, which in my opinion, and in the research that I've done, is absolutely the wrong path we're going after. Because the pharmaceutical companies are doing exactly what we asked them to do, is to provide a drug to give relief to people who are suffering legitimate chronic pain. Good for them. Their marketing, are they clean? No. Their marketing has been proven to be sketchy, and they've been fined for that, and they should. But all the way back to this, we're looking at all these ways to clean up what the cat dragged in. Well, how did we get to this point? What dragged the cat in? And it is the American love affair with getting messed up. And that is, in our number one primary drug, alcohol. We have been lulled into this false sense of security with a legal, illicit drug, alcohol, that we're told is safe and that we can drink responsibly. And so we've groomed people, we've groomed our young to take drugs.
Yeah. And they watch their parents do it, and they think it's okay.
Mm-hmm. And they see it everywhere. Of course, they're bombarded with television advertising. And when Johns Hopkins University Center for Alcohol Marketing to the Youth did their study about a year ago, and in conjunction with the RAND Corporation, they looked at how much of the advertising for alcohol kids were seeing. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, those ads are geared for adults, right? Supposedly. So people over the age of 21, the legal drinking age in most areas, those are the targets for those ads. But kids are seeing kids as young as 9 years old. Gene, these are 4th graders, okay? And they have unaided recall of up to 3 brands of beer already in 4th grade. So they're seeing the ads. The ads are coming down to their level. The Rand Corporation study that I mentioned found that they're seeing 21% more alcohol advertising than people who are old enough to buy alcohol. So we're telling them at an early age, whether they're watching it around the family celebrations, around the family dinner table, seeing dad come home, pop a beer to relax from work, a stressful day, or they're seeing it on their media device of choice, whether it's the television or those phones or tablets.
Exactly. So the media is what inspired you to write this book, is what I'm hearing you say. But what about you? What inspires you? Who inspires you?
What inspires me is the fact that I made it through a pretty treacherous disease that nearly killed me twice. But more importantly, was the impact that it had on my kids. And as I write about alcohol and the disease of addiction, and in the newest book, write about the opioid crisis, it's important for me, it's a motivating factor for me, not to sell as many books as I can, but to help as many families as I can. No kid should have to go through what my kids went through because I had a bad relationship with alcohol and I didn't do enough to manage it. As soon as I knew that I was alcoholic, and I knew I was alcoholic long before I did anything about it. So that's why I write what I write. I also write about the health consequences pretty frequently. In fact, one of my books is dedicated to the entire topic because we are silently or slowly being lulled into this security that we are drinking something that's entirely safe. And in some places, they're even touting it as healthy. And when you're drinking a known toxin and a known carcinogen, is there any amount that you can consider reasonable, responsible, or safe? No. So I've gone further on my fourth book. It's I Can't See the Forest Through with All These Trees. I talk about the health consequences. Well, we have, dare I say, an epidemic of cancer in this country, but we have a pretty tragic occurrence of cancer throughout all age ranges in this country. And alcohol use, even moderate use, is attached to 8 different types of cancer if you just follow the path it takes through the body. Yeah. So not many people, only 1 in 4 people even know there's a connection between alcohol use and cancer, and most of those assume it's because of people who drink the way I did rather than drink in moderation.
Yeah, and you know, the other day I think I had the TV turn on in the morning watching Good Morning America, and they were saying, yeah, it's just now been medically proven that it's okay to drink a glass of wine every day. It's going to make you healthier. And I'm like, really? You know, because I know how my body reacts to it, and my body doesn't process the sugar in alcohol. And I feel really bad if I drink hard liquor. I can't tell you how long it's been since I had anything with actual alcohol in it. And just even a glass of red wine will give me a raging hangover the next day. To me, it's not worth it to drink it. So how can that be healthy? You know,
and it's not. The study that you came out the other day, I read through this. There's a distinction to be made between observational studies and evidence-based studies. And the news industry makes no distinction between the two. But an observational study compares apples and oranges and comes up with lemonade. Yeah. And they'll come up with something that's newsy. However, if you do the research, A, you look at who funded this research, and B, what kind of size, what is the audience, what is the participation base for the study. And you can poke a lot of holes in those observational studies because at the end of the day, you're talking about encouraging drinking of a toxin and known carcinogen. And the oncologists that I've spoken with on 2 continents have said no amount of this is safe when it comes to cancer. So how can we be in one camp, the oncologists, the true scientists who deal with this disease every day, saying, and we have another group, usually funded by the alcohol industry or at least at arm's length, saying that, yeah, go ahead, drink a glass of wine a day. Yep. Got to follow the money.
Exactly. And, you know, and that's so true with everything. And I think we tend to forget that. I think that the public, and again, this is a generalization, but the public tends to believe what they see on the news as true.
Mm-hmm.
And, and I have gotten to where I just can't even watch it anymore because I don't know what's being put inside my head,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really believe, either way. I know there's a lot of talk about fake news, but I don't know if the people that are the proponents of, blaming fake news versus just regular old news, other than the weather, I'm not sure.
Right. And I started my career as a TV weatherman, and even that's a crap.
Yeah, sorry. So that's probably a crapshoot as well, because, it is what it is. And even
Mm-hmm.
then, with the best tools, more often than not, you can't predict it.
One of the things that I look at when I wrote this book, and all along in the past decade and a half that I've been researching the topic, is look at where we are today with smoking. In 1967, the year I was born, and I'll do the math for you, I'm 51. A mere babe. 72% of the adult males in this country smoke.
Yeah.
Today, 72% don't. And why is that? Because in 1997, we came to our senses. We went after the tobacco industry. Big Tobacco paid a big fine. Mm-hmm. And then we started educating people about the health dangers of smoking. So we've come, in a couple of generations, we've come around to, hey, this isn't glamorous. This isn't fun. This isn't sexy. This isn't hip or healthy. This is a killer. And where we're at today is at the beginning of a sea change, in that we're beginning to talk about alcohol in the same fashion. But in the old days, in 1964, that's when the Surgeon General first came out with that report that said smoking's bad for you. And it took that long to 1997 to begin to turn the tide. We didn't have the internet. Al Gore didn't invent it yet. So Now we're full speed ahead, and that we're coming out with study after study that says this is really not a substance that healthy tissues favor. This is a dangerous, dangerous drug in terms of health consequences. So more and more the message is getting out through the internet, through other alternative means, and in addition to books, not just mine, but other esteemed scientists who have more letters after their name than I can imagine having after mine, have come out to say, really, guys, it's time to wake up. It's an eye-opener when we look at, in the past 2 years, we've had the first ever 2 consecutive year decline in life expectancy in the United States. And that's because we're drinking more. We're not drinking less.
Yeah. Now, you're doing a seminar. Is it web-based, focusing on your books?
Yes. Right now, after the start of the first of the year, one of the most common, more popular New Year's resolutions is I'm going to quit drinking. They made it through a pretty messy Thanksgiving, or maybe it wasn't the glamorous, glorious Christmas that they thought it was going to be. Or maybe a nudge from the missus or the husband saying, enough's enough. Time to look at your drinking. So it's a very common New Year's resolution. I started a series right on New Year's Eve. I'm in part 4 right now, talking about a new year, new you, and no alcohol. I cover all 5 of my books in this. I look at why to quit, looking at the social consequences and the health consequences, looking at how to quit, everything from the best known of all, the mother of all 12-step groups, Alcohol Anonymous, all the way to the Sinclair method, which is a very cutting-edge treatment for the disease of alcoholism, but generally looking at what the drug does to you rather than what people think it does for them. And then following that, beginning in February and leading up to Alcohol Awareness Month, I'll be doing another series dedicated solely to the new book, Look What Dragged the Cat In, talking about the connections to the current opioid crisis and every crisis we've been through with drugs since the 1860s. It's a straight line back to alcohol. It's just a line that we didn't want to look at. It's time to look at it.
Yeah. So, did you record the series that you started on New Year's Day so that people could go back and join it now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's on my website, which is alcohologist.com. Thanks. You nailed that at the top of the show. I appreciate that. And it's also on my YouTube channel, which is Scott Stevens. You can Google or on YouTube, you can search New Year, New You, No Alcohol. That'll come up to the series as well. We're on episode 4, like I said. So find it on my website, find it on Sacred Stories Media as well, and you can also find it through my YouTube channel.
Fantastic. So what's next for you, Scott?
That's a good question. After my first book, I said I'm never going to write another book. I don't have another book in me, and here I am 5 books later.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm busy doing conferences here in the United States and internationally, talking about the new book, but specifically talking about the health consequences of alcohol use, even in moderation. As I do these scientific and academic conferences, it gives me a lot of exposure to the other side of the world and also the other side of the recovery industry, talking more to the psychologists, because at the end of the day, everybody drinks for the same reason. Alcoholics and non-alcoholics alike drink to relieve stress. Well, what else can we be doing to relieve our stress aside from going for the bottle or the can? So in all these academic conferences I've been doing, it's been eye-opening to get their perspective on overall managing the trauma, the stress in our lives, and how to avoid reaching for something that's going to take us anywhere but where we are right now.
And I'm all about going within and meditation to relieve the stress, because the answers are all inside ourselves. We just have to take the time to get quiet and go listen there, Now, I have a kind of off-the-wall question. You say you've been doing these symposiums and conferences all over the world. Do we have a bigger problem in the United States with alcohol, or do you find other countries have a bigger problem than we do?
We're all in the same ugly, messy boat. Mm-hmm. Our problem is as big as the countries that we think have the big problems, like in Eastern Europe, countries like Belarus. You may think that the Balkan area has the worst drinking problem in the world, and ours is every bit as bad as that. We're in greater denial here in the United States than a lot of parts of the world. And when you look at Australia, especially, Australia has notorious alcohol problems, but they're easily a decade ahead of us in their management of consumption by increasing taxation, which we haven't done in the United States, increased taxation on alcohol since 1991. So they're ahead of the game. They're way ahead of us because they acknowledge that there is a problem, and the problem, what causes problems is one. And in most of those cases in Australia, it's been an alcohol-related crime, alcohol-related family crisis, and alcohol-related disease and illness. Also in Europe, countries about Scotland, we think they're Scotch swilling bearded men over there, and they've got this great plan in place, way ahead of where we are today with all of our pretend sophistication, because they have increased the minimum price of alcohol in their country. So there is a limit below which no alcohol can be sold. And this has had a result in reducing consumption. Overall, what they're doing is bringing up the level of health in their country, in a country that pays for the healthcare coverage. And as we begin or continue a dialogue in this country about healthcare and about healthcare affordability and access to healthcare, alcohol absolutely has to be part of that discussion, just like it has been in Australia and in many parts of Europe. And the thing that I really believe in, and that we'll see before this decade is out, is a ban on alcohol advertising in sports. Kids love sports. Grown-ups love sports too, but kids love sports. And to have a continuous bombardment of logos and brands and beer advertisements throughout the sport, you're grooming that next generation of drinkers. And in France and many parts of Europe, they've banned that kind of advertising to stop soliciting to the young kids. Mm-hmm. Let them make a decision based on information, quality information about what this drug does to you rather than what they think it's going to do for them.
Wow. Well, we've run out of time, Scott. I want to thank you very much for coming on tonight and sharing this information, because I'm sure that there are a lot of people out there who really didn't understand the true nature of the crisis, if you will, because of what they've listened to and what they've watched. So, again, listeners, his website is alcohologist.com. Go check out his book. I think you'll really be enlightened by it. That and his other 4 as well. And next week, I'm going to be talking more about health. My guest next week is going to be Janet Nestor. She's going to be joining me again with her new book, which is called Revolutionize Your Health. So we're going to be looking at that. And if you've not already been to my website, which is jeanadrienne.com, please go there. You can take advantage of a complimentary 15-minute consultation with me for free. Also, if you sign up for my newsletter, you receive a free subscription to the online version of my InnerSpeak card so that you can start clearing away the things that are blocking you in any or all areas of your life. And until next time, remember, people who take responsibility for their lives create the reality they desire. Much love to you.